When my twin sister showed up at the hospital that evening, she didn't look like herself. Her hair was tangled, her blouse torn, and her face, oh God, her face. Bruises bloomed beneath her eyes like dark violets spreading through snow. She smiled at me, the kind of smile that tries to convince the world it's still okay. But her eyes were hollow. I had seen madness, pain, and delusion during my years in Crest Hill State Hospital, but nothing compared to the silence behind her gaze. I remember the metallic smell of disinfectant, the echo of the nurse's shoes, the hum of the fluorescent lights above us, and the faint tremor in her hands when she set a basket of bruised peaches on the table. She whispered my name, Nora, and something inside me cracked open like a bone snapping clean in two. That's when I knew this visit wasn't about love or longing. It was a cry for help. I hadn't seen my twin Lila in nearly 6 years. The last time she came, she was glowing in her wedding dress, saying she had finally found someone kind. His name was Evan Carter, a rising lawyer from Savannah, polite, sharp, and full of false charm. I remember how he shook my hand through the glass partition and smiled like he owned the world. Back then, I thought his arrogance was harmless. I was wrong. Now the girl standing in front of me wasn't the same one who had laughed about honeymoons and pink roses. She was trembling and her voice was barely a whisper. "How are you doing, Nora?" she asked, her words brittle, breaking apart before they even reached me. I didn't answer. I just stared. Her long sleeves, buttoned all the way to her neck in the middle of July, told me more than any confession could. I rose from the metal chair and stepped closer until the smell of cheap makeup hit me. I lifted her chin gently with my hand. "Who did this to you?" She flinched as if I had struck her. "It's nothing," she murmured. "I fell off my bike, my throat went dry. You fell off your bike and only hurt one eye." My voice was ice sharp enough to slice through her excuses, her hands twisted in her lap. Her knuckles were swollen, her nails bitten down to the skin. When I took her wrist, she gasped. The bruises that trailed down her arm told me everything I needed to know. Old ones yellowed with time, new ones purple and raw. I released her slowly, afraid my own rage might bleed through my fingers. "Evan," I said quietly. It wasn't a question. She broke. Her shoulders trembled, her voice came out in sobs that seemed to scrape her throat raw. "He hits me, Nora. He hits me when he loses money. His mother calls me trash. His sister makes me scrub their clothes with my hands. I don't sleep. I don't eat. And he hit Sophie too." The world tilted. I felt my pulse in my ears, a roar like the tide smashing against cliffs. My niece, my sweet 3-year-old niece, hurt by that man. I sat her down gently on my narrow bed, poured her water and let her speak. Every word that fell from her mouth was a stone hurled at my chest. She spoke of nights without food, of slaps that left her deaf in one ear for a day, of being forced to kneel for hours on the kitchen floor. She told me about Sophie's crying, about the laughter of Evan's mother Marjorie, and his sister Tina, who watched and joined in. By the time she finished, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so clean it felt holy. 10 years inside this hospital had taught me many things: patience, restraint, silence. But they hadn't erased the storm that lived inside me. I had once broken a man's arm because he touched my sister. I had been 16 then. Now I was 28, stronger, colder, and infinitely more patient. Lila was still crying when I rose and looked into the small mirror bolted to the wall. 2 faces stared back at me, hers and mine. Identical. Same scars under the chin from when we fell off our bikes as children. Same hair, same jawline, same heart that once beat for each other. But there was one difference: she had learned to hide her pain, and I had learned to turn mine into power. "You didn't come here just to visit," I said. She blinked. "What? You came here to switch places?" Her eyes widened in horror. "Nora, no, you don't understand. That house is hell. Those people," I cut her off, my voice low and steady. "I understand perfectly. You'll stay here and I'll go out there. You'll sleep, eat red. No one will hurt you. And I smiled faintly. "I'll teach them what fear feels like." She grabbed my hand desperately. You'll get caught. They'll see through you. I looked at our reflection again and shook my head. No one will. We're the same. The only difference is that I'm not afraid anymore. Visiting hours were nearly over. The clock on the wall ticked louder than my heartbeat. Lila hesitated, torn between dread and the small spark of hope still left in her. I stripped off my pale hospital uniform. She reluctantly took off her worn blouse. We exchanged clothes in silence. The air smelled of antiseptic and destiny. I stuffed her old ID card and house keys into my pocket. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. From now on, you're Nora, I whispered. If anyone asks you anything, don't speak. Just nod or shake your head. That's what I always did. You'll be fine. Lila's lips trembled. Nora, what will you do? Ended, I said. The bell rang, signaling the end of visitation. I hugged her one last time. She felt weightless, as if fear had hollowed her bones. Don't move from here, I told her. Wait for me. I walked toward the door. The nurse looked up and smiled politely. Mrs. Carter leaving already, I nodded, forcing a tired smile that matched my sister's. The iron door clanged shut behind me, with a final metallic cry. For the first time in 10 years, I breathed free air. It tasted like rust smoke and freedom. Outside, the summer sun burned my skin. I squinted, blinking into the light. 10 years behind those walls, and the world still smelled the same gasoline dust-fried food from the street vendors. But something inside me had changed. I wasn't the caged girl anymore. I was the storm they locked away. The bus ride to Savannah felt endless. I sat in the back, clutching the set of keys in my pocket. Lila had told me where she lived, a single-story house on Riverbend Street, near the industrial district. It's small but safe, she had said once years ago. She lied. When I got there, the air smelled of rot and grease. Paint peeled from the walls, the mailbox hung crooked. I pushed the rusty gate open and stepped inside. The house was chaos. Dirty plates, half-eaten food, a child's toy broken on the floor. I froze when I saw her Sophie sitting in the corner hugging a doll missing its head. She looked up at me, startled. For a second she didn't move. Then, her small voice came out fragile and uncertain. Mommy, I swallowed hard, forcing a smile through the burn in my throat. Yes, baby. Mommy's here. She didn't run to me. She shrank back, clutching her doll tighter. That's when I knew what they had done to her. They had turned my sister's daughter into a creature of fear. I knelt down, slowly, careful not to frighten her. Come here, sweetheart. She hesitated, then looked past me toward the hallway. I followed her gaze, just as a voice cold and dripping with contempt echoed from inside. So the little wife finally crawls back, it said. Evan stood in the doorway, tall, handsome, and rotten to the core. His tie hung loose, his eyes bloodshot. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of his mother Marjorie in her floral robe, fanning herself lazily. Did you enjoy your trip to see your lunatic sister? She sneered. I straightened up, my heart steady, my blood calm. I did, I said. She sends her love. Evan smirked, stepping closer, his voice low and threatening. You're late for dinner. I met his eyes without flinching. Then let's eat. In that moment, under the stifling summer heat and the weight of their arrogance, something shifted. They didn't know it yet, but the woman standing before them wasn't the timid wife they could slap into silence. She was me. And the hell they'd built for Lila was about to collapse, brick by brick, bone by bone, night by night. That evening, as I tucked Sophie into bed, her small hand wrapped around my finger, I whispered, "Sleep, little one." The monsters don't know it yet, but the storm's already inside the house. That night, after everyone in the Carter house had gone to sleep, I sat by Sophie's bed in the dark, listening to the slow rhythm of her breathing, and made myself a silent vow when the sun rose, their hell would begin to burn from within. The next morning, the house smelled of burned grease and cigarette smoke. Sunlight leaked through the blinds in narrow golden bars that cut across the filthy table. I could hear the faint hum of traffic outside, distant and almost peaceful, until Marjorie's voice cracked through the silence like a whip. Lila, are you deaf? Get up and make breakfast. I opened my eyes slowly. The mattress beneath me was thin and uneven, its springs groaning every time I moved. I sat up, looked around the small room, and felt anger coil tight in my chest. The walls were stained yellow with humidity, and a pile of dirty clothes filled one corner. On the dresser lay a single photograph, Lila on her wedding day, smiling beside Evan. Her smile looked forced even then, but I could see the hope in her eyes. Hope was a cruel thing. I got dressed and stepped into the kitchen. Marjorie was already seated at the table, her robe open, her plump hands busy sorting pills into a plastic tray. Tina sat beside her, scrolling through her phone, her blonde hair tangled, her face bloated from sleep. Neither of them looked up. "There's coffee on the counter," I said, keeping my voice low. Marjorie snorted. "Is that how you greet your mother-in-law now?" Tina laughed without lifting her eyes. "Guess she finally thinks she's better than us." I smiled thinly and poured coffee into a chipped mug. "Better no. Just awake." The room fell silent for a moment. They weren't used to Lila talking back. I could see Marjorie's head tilt slightly, her eyes narrowing, studying me like I was a stain she couldn't identify. Evan entered then, still in his work shirt, the top buttons undone. His presence made the air heavier. He didn't look at anyone, just grabbed a plate and slammed it onto the counter. "Where's breakfast?" "On the stove," I replied. He lifted the lid from the pan, found the eggs slightly burned, and turned toward me with a sneer. "Can't you do one thing right?" I met his eyes, steady calm. "I did it right. You just woke up too late." His hand twitched. I could almost see the old habit in him, the desire to strike. But I didn't move. I just stood there waiting, letting the silence stretch between us until it became unbearable. Marjorie's voice broke at first. "Evan, sit down. Don't start this morning," he muttered under his breath and sat. Tina smirked at me. "You must be on your period or something, Lila. You've got a tone." I turned my gaze to her, the same calm expression. "No, Tina. I just have a spine." Marjorie gasped as if I'd cursed. Evan slammed his fork onto the table. "Watch your mouth!" I shrugged and walked toward the sink. "I have for years." The tension was thick enough to choke on. I could feel their eyes on my back, confusion laced with a trace of fear. The old Lila would have apologized, begged, tried to make peace. I wasn't her. After breakfast, Evan left for work, slamming the door so hard that the window rattled. Tina disappeared into her room, and Marjorie followed her with a storm of complaints about lazy women these days. I was finally alone. Sophie was awake now, sitting on the floor with her doll. Her hair was messy, her cheeks pale, but when she saw me, she smiled hesitantly. "Mommy, can we go outside today?" My heart softened. "Yes, baby, we can." We walked to the small yard behind the house. The grass was overgrown and dry, and the fence leaned sideways, but the sun felt warm on our faces. Sophie picked a dandelion and held it up. "If you blow it, you make a wish." I crouched beside her. "What will you wish for?" She thought for a moment, then whispered, "That you'll smile more." Something caught in my throat. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and said, "That's a good wish." When she ran off to chase butterflies, I sat on the cracked porch step and watched her. The sight of that little girl playing in the sunlight, the same sunlight that had once been denied to me behind iron bars, filled me with both joy and fury. She deserved better than this rotten house and the monsters living in it, and I intended to give her better. By noon, the heat grew unbearable. I went back inside, wiping sweat from my neck. Marjorie was on the phone, her voice sharp. "I told you the mortgage is paid. Don't you dare call again." She hung up, muttering curses. When she saw me, she forced a fake smile. "Eavesdropping again?" "Lila, no," I said, picking up a broom. "Just cleaning." "You should clean your manners first," she snapped. I ignored her, sweeping the floor slowly, deliberately. She hated being ignored. It ate at her more than any insult. Later that afternoon, I found a pile of letters on the hallway table, unpaid bills, gambling notices, threats from banks. Evan's name was on most of them. I smiled. So the perfect husband had cracks in his crown. When he returned that evening, his face was red from the sun and fury. "Who touched my mail?" he barked. I looked up from the sink. "I did. You should pay your debts." He froze like someone had slapped him. Marjorie turned pale. Tina peeked out of her room, eyes wide. "What did you just say?" he asked slowly. I dried my hands on a towel and faced him. "You heard me. You should pay your debts before preaching about responsibility." He took a step closer. "You think you can talk to me like that?" "Yes," I said softly. "I think I can." For a moment, no one breathed. Then Marjorie exploded. "Enough, Evan. Don't waste your breath on her. She's been strange lately. Maybe she's got that nervous breakdown again." Tina nodded eagerly. "She talks like she's someone else." Evan's eyes darted between them, uncertain. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker across his face. "Maybe I am someone else," I murmured. He stared at me for a long time, then turned away, muttering, "Dinner better be ready." While they ate, I stood by the sink, pretending to wash dishes, but watching them carefully. Marjorie complained about the food being too bland. Tina rolled her eyes and texted. Evan chewed angrily like the act itself was punishment. It was a perfect portrait of misery. I glanced at Sophie sitting at the end of the table, nibbling her bread quietly. She looked up at me, and I smiled gently. For a moment, her face lit up. After dinner, I tucked her into bed again. She looked at me sleepily and said, "Mommy, why are you not scared tonight?" I kissed her forehead. "Because the monsters should be." When the house finally went silent, I stepped into the living room. The clock ticked loudly, and the moonlight painted the floor silver. I opened the cabinet drawer and found what I was looking for: Evan's leather belt. The same one Lila had described, the one he used to teach lessons. I ran my fingers over it slowly, feeling the cracked edges of the worn leather. In that moment, I wasn't in the house anymore. I was back in the hospital gym, gripping the metal bars of my window, counting push-ups to keep my anger from devouring me. 10 years of control, 10 years of training. I smiled faintly. They thought they'd locked away a madwoman. They'd only built a stronger one. I placed the belt neatly on the dining table, right where he'd see it first thing in the morning. A small reminder, a warning. Then I sat on the couch, listening to the house. Breathed the creak of pipes, the soft snore from Marjorie's room, the faint rustle of Sophie turning in her sleep. My reflection stared back at me from the dark window. The same face as Lila's, but the eyes were mine. Cold, steady, alive. He would wake up tomorrow thinking he still ruled this house. By nightfall, he'd begin to understand. I whispered to the darkness, almost a promise. "You wanted a wife who obeys Evan. You got a storm instead." When I woke before dawn, the house was still, the belt gleaming faintly on the table where I'd left it, and I knew the real game between us would begin the moment his eyes found it. The morning came heavy with heat and the sour smell of last night's anger. The belt I had left on the dining table was still there, coiled like a sleeping snake. Evan saw it the moment he walked in, his tie half knotted, his eyes already narrowed. "Who touched my belt?" he demanded. Marjorie looked up from her coffee, startled. Tina glanced from him to me. I dried my hands with a towel and said evenly, "You left it out. I just cleaned the table." He stared at me, lips curling. "You think this is some kind of joke?" "No," I said softly. "I don't think anything here is funny." Marjorie's chair screeched as she stood. "Both of you stop it. It's too early for your nonsense." Evan threw his napkin onto the table and muttered, "Maybe she's the one who needs to be taught a lesson again." That word lesson hung in the air like smoke. Marjorie's hand froze on her cup. Tina smirked nervously. I met his gaze without blinking. "Go ahead," I said. "Try teaching." He hesitated. Something in my tone made him shift his weight. The woman in front of him wasn't trembling, wasn't pleading. She stood still, quiet, unafraid. He grabbed his briefcase and stormed out the door, slamming it so hard the frame rattled. Marjorie sighed heavily. "You push him too much, Lila. You never learn." I looked at her, my voice calm. Maybe he should learn something for once. She frowned, unsure what to say. Tina shot me a look full of disgust. Don't act so high and mighty. You're just as pathetic as you've always been. I smiled faintly. If you really believed that, you wouldn't sound so nervous. She glared at me and stomped off to her room. The house fell quiet. Only the ticking of the clock filled the space between my breaths. Sophie wandered in, rubbing her eyes. "Mommy, can I have pancakes?" Her voice was soft, innocent, so small it made my chest ache. "Of course, sweetheart," I said. "Mommy will make them right now." While she sat at the table coloring with a broken crayon, I mixed the batter. The smell of butter filled the kitchen. For a moment, it felt almost normal, like the life we should have had. Sophie giggled as I shaped the pancakes into little hearts. She clapped her hands. "It's pretty," I smiled, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "You're pretty." Just as we began eating, Marjorie walked in again, her robe flapping. "Why are you wasting food like that?" Playing with pancakes, Sophie flinched. I stood straight. "She's just having breakfast, Marjorie. It's Mrs. Carter to you," she snapped. "And a child doesn't need sweets in the morning. It'll rot her teeth." Sophie shrank in her seat, her fork slipping from her hand. I placed my palm gently on her head. "Her teeth are fine," I said. Marjorie's nostrils flared. "Don't talk back to me in my own house." I turned, lowering my voice. "Then maybe you should act like a human in it." Her eyes widened in outrage. "What did you just say? You heard me." For a moment, I thought she might hit me. Her hand twitched, her fingers curling. But something in my expression made her pause. She backed away slowly, muttering curses as she left the kitchen. Sophie whispered, "Mommy, are you in trouble?" I smiled and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "No, darling. Trouble's afraid of me." That afternoon, I went into the living room. The curtains were drawn, the air thick with the smell of dust and old perfume. On the mantel, photos of Evan's family lined the shelf, smiling faces, stiff postures, lies frozen in frames. I took them down one by one, dusted them, and set them back in different order. Small changes, unsettling enough for anyone who noticed. I found an old notebook in the drawer, its cover torn. Inside were Marjorie's neat handwriting lists of bills, hidden payments, letters to the mortgage company. Beneath it, a sealed envelope addressed to Mrs. M. Carter, personal. I slipped it into my pocket. Tina came down the stairs, chewing gum loudly. "What are you doing snooping around?" I turned to her with a polite smile. "Tidying. Someone has to." She rolled her eyes. "You've really lost it. You think acting tough makes you special. You're still just the poor girl he married out of pity." I walked closer until she had to step back. "You're right. He did marry out of pity. Too bad the pity wasn't for himself." Her gum fell from her mouth. I brushed past her and went outside before she could think of a response. In the yard, I opened the envelope. Inside were documents, an old insurance payout from Marjorie's deceased husband. Nearly $900,000. My pulse quickened. So that's how they kept their claws sharp. Money and cruelty always made good companions. When Evan came home that evening, he was quieter than usual. I was sitting on the porch watching Sophie draw with chalk on the concrete steps. He looked tired, but there was something else in his eyes, a glint of uncertainty. He stopped beside me. "Where's my mother?" "In her room," I said, counting her blessings. "Or her money," he frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I smiled faintly. "You'll find out." He didn't answer. He just stared at Sophie, who was drawing a stick figure family, 3 figures holding hands. "You and me and her," she said proudly. Evan crouched down beside her, forcing a smile. "Good job, sweetheart." But his hand shook as he patted her head. Dinner was awkward. Marjorie and Tina barely spoke. Evan chewed silently, his eyes flicking toward me again and again. I could feel his unease spreading like a crack through glass. He didn't know why, but something felt off. After the meal, he followed me into the kitchen. "What's going on with you lately?" he asked, his tone tight. "You've been acting strange. Talking back." I kept washing dishes. Maybe I got tired of whispering. He stepped closer. "You're not making sense." "I make perfect sense," I said, turning off the faucet. "You just don't like the sound of it." His jaw tightened. "You think I won't put you in your place?" I faced him. "You can try." He stared at me for a long second, his breath short and hot. Then he laughed, but it was hollow. "You really have lost your mind." "Maybe," I said, smiling slightly. "But I'm still the only one here who isn't lying." He left the kitchen, slamming the door so hard the plates trembled. I waited until his footsteps faded upstairs, then opened the cabinet and took out the small tape recorder I'd hidden behind the spice jars. The red light blinked steadily. Every word he'd said had been captured. Later that night, I tucked Sophie in again. The moonlight slid through the curtains and touched her face. She looked peaceful, finally unafraid. Down the hallway, I heard Marjorie and Tina whispering voices, sharp, full of suspicion. "Something's wrong with her," Marjorie hissed. "She's not the same. She's dangerous," Tina whispered back. "We should tell Evan." I smiled in the dark. Let them talk. Let them guess. Fear had finally changed its home address. In my room, I took out the envelope with Marjorie's secret money and placed it under the loose floorboard near the bed. One day, soon it would become part of their downfall. I sat on the edge of the bed, the night quiet, except for the hum of crickets. I looked at my hands, stronger than they'd ever been, and whispered to myself, "Control the fear, and you control the house." Then I turned off the light, letting the darkness settle comfortably around me. Upstairs, Evan tossed in his sleep, muttering through half-formed nightmares. For once, I didn't pity him. I closed my eyes and breathed in the warm, humid air. The storm hadn't started yet, but the wind was rising. That night, as the house sank into uneasy sleep, I lay awake listening to the wind scraping against the windows, knowing that by morning fear would stop being my memory and start becoming theirs. The sound of rain tapping against the window woke me before sunrise. The house was quiet, too quiet, as if it was holding its breath. I slipped out of bed and walked down the hallway, my bare feet brushing against the cold wooden floor. The belt was gone from the table. Evan had taken it. I smiled faintly. Let him think it was his secret again. Let him wonder what I meant by leaving it there. Fear worked best when it whispered. I started coffee and cracked eggs into the pan. The smell filled the kitchen, soft and familiar, masking the storm outside. Sophie patted in, rubbing her eyes, her small voice cutting through the silence. "Mommy, it's raining." "Yes, baby. The sky's washing itself clean." She stared at the window for a moment. "Will it wash us too?" I leaned down, brushed her hair from her face, and whispered, "It already has." By the time Evan came downstairs, the smell of coffee was stronger than the smell of tension. He paused in the doorway, still half-dressed, his eyes flicking toward me, searching for something. I didn't give it to him. I poured him coffee like any other morning. He sat sipping cautiously. "You've been quiet lately." "I've had practice," I said, setting a plate of eggs before him. He frowned. "Practice?" I met his eyes. 10 years' worth. He froze, unsure how to respond. Marjorie entered the kitchen in her robe, her hair pinned, messily holding her usual air of command. "Is this going to be another morning full of tension?" she asked. "Because if it is, I'll eat upstairs." Evan said nothing. I smiled. "No tension here, Marjorie. Only breakfast." Her lips thinned. "It's Mrs. Carter to you." I stirred my coffee, my smile widening just enough. "Of course." The rain grew heavier outside. The house felt smaller, like its walls were closing in. I could sense their unease, the small glances, the nervous shifting of hands, the silence that came too easily. After breakfast, Evan left for work. The sound of his car starting was a relief that felt like fresh air. Marjorie lingered, standing by the window, staring at the rain. "He's been different lately," she said suddenly. I looked up from wiping the counter. "You mean quieter?" She turned to me, her gaze sharp. "You know what I mean. Don't act innocent. He's distracted. A man doesn't just lose focus unless something's happening at home. Maybe he's tired," I said lightly. "Maybe he's realizing home isn't heaven." Her eyes narrowed. "Be careful, Lila. My son is everything to this family. If he breaks, we all do." I folded the towel neatly. "Then maybe it's time something broke." Her mouth opened, then closed again. She didn't know what to say, and that silence was my victory. Later, when the rain stopped, I decided to take Sophie to the park. The air smelled clean, the kind of air that comes after a storm, heavy with renewal. Sophie ran through puddles laughing. It was the first real laugh I'd heard from her. I sat on a bench under the wet oak trees, watching her, my hands clasped together. A woman sat down beside me, her umbrella dripping. "Your daughter's adorable," she said. I smiled. "Thank you." "She looks happy," the woman said, kindly. "You must be doing something right." The words sank into me like warmth. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear them. When we returned home, Marjorie was waiting at the door, arms crossed. "Where have you been? The laundry's still not done." I brushed past her, holding Sophie's hand. "We went outside. She needed fresh air." "Fresh air doesn't pay bills," Marjorie snapped. "Neither does cruelty," I said, and kept walking. Her gasp followed me down the hall. "What did you just say?" I turned briefly, my expression calm. "You heard me. That afternoon I cleaned the living room. I moved through it like a ghost, quiet and efficient. Every photo, every object, every reminder of their power, I touched them, all rearranged them slightly. A crooked frame here, a missing key there. Small changes only, I noticed. When Tina came home, she stopped dead at the doorway. "Did you move my things? I cleaned your mess," I said, without looking up. She scoffed. "You're losing your mind, Lila." I smiled. "That's what they said the first time, too." Her face paled. "What are you talking about? Nothing you'd understand." She muttered something under her breath and went upstairs. I heard the faint click of her door locking. Good. Fear had started to take root. That evening, Evan came home later than usual. He looked worn out, his tie loose, his eyes bloodshot. He dropped his briefcase near the door. "Rough day," he muttered. "Did you lose another client?" I asked gently. He blinked. "How did you? Who told you that I tilted my head?" "You did. You talk in your sleep." His jaw clenched. "You're lying." "Am I?" I stepped closer, my voice low. "You talk a lot when you think no one's listening." He stared at me, uncertain, his mouth half open. "You're trying to get in my head." I smiled faintly. "You make it easy." He stormed past me and went upstairs. I heard drawers opening, footsteps, pacing, the faint thud of something hitting a wall. When he came down later, his hands were shaking. "Where's my file folder?" "What folder?" "The one with my tax documents." I shrugged. "You're the lawyer. Shouldn't you know where your papers are?" His face darkened. He grabbed my wrist hard enough to make my skin burn. "Don't play games with me." I didn't flinch. I leaned in close and whispered, "Games no, Evan. This is education." He dropped my wrist as if it burned him. Marjorie's voice called from the kitchen. "What's happening?" "Nothing," I said. "Just another lesson." Evan walked out the back door and didn't return for 2 hours. When he did, he smelled of whiskey. He stumbled past me, muttering to himself. I let him go. Monsters always exhausted themselves eventually. After midnight, I sat by the window, listening to the steady hum of rain returning. Sophie stirred in her sleep, murmuring my name. I went to her, tucked the blanket tighter around her small body, and brushed a kiss against her forehead. In the dim light, her innocence was a knife twisting in my chest. The child who once feared shadows now slept peacefully. That was my victory, even if the world never saw it. Outside, a car passed, its headlights cutting through the wet glass, briefly illuminating the dining table, the place where so many of Lila's tears had fallen. Now it was spotless. I stared at it, my reflection faint in the window pane. The woman looking back wasn't a ghost of the past anymore. She was real, solid, alive. I whispered to the rain, "Every storm starts small." From upstairs came the faint sound of a door closing, followed by silence. The house was still, but it wasn't calm. Something inside its walls had begun to shift. I poured myself a cup of cold coffee and sat at the table waiting for dawn. There was no going back now. Every bruise Lila had hidden, every scream she had swallowed would be answered. The night stretched long, but I didn't feel tired. My heart was steady, my purpose clear. They thought they were safe inside their lies. By the time they realized the truth, it would already be too late. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, the house felt hollow, as if it already knew the storm inside was only just beginning, and Evan hadn't come home. Evan didn't come home that night. The house stayed dark except for the flickering porch light that buzzed like an old fly. Marjorie tried to call him 3 times, pacing back and forth in her robe, muttering about ungrateful men. Tina spent the evening in front of the TV, pretending not to care, but glancing at the clock every few minutes. I sat by the window, sipping cold coffee, feeling the pulse of something shifting in the air. The silence in that house wasn't peace, it was pressure waiting to break. He returned at dawn. His shoes scraped against the porch. His breath smelled of whiskey and rage. I heard the front door slam and the heavy thud of his footsteps. Marjorie hurried out of her room. "Evan, where have you been? Do you know what time it is?" "Don't start," he said, his voice rough and raw. "Not now. Not now. Your reputation is in ruins. People are talking," she hissed. "Let them talk," he shouted, slamming his hand on the wall. "They've been talking all my life." The sound echoed down the hallway. Sophie stirred in her sleep upstairs. I stepped into the living room, calm as still water. "You're scaring her," I said. Evan turned, his face red and puffy eyes bloodshot. "You stay out of this." "I live here too," I answered. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "You exist here, Lila. You don't live." I met his gaze, my voice steady. "Not anymore." He blinked, uncertain what I meant, and stormed into the kitchen. The sound of cupboard doors slamming followed. I walked to the doorway and leaned against the frame. "Did the world stop spinning without your control for one night?" He spun around. "You think you're clever." "No," I said. "Just awake." Marjorie's voice broken, sharp and desperate. "Stop it, both of you. This family is falling apart because of her attitude." She pointed at me, her hands trembling. I looked at her coolly. "Families fall apart because of lies, not because someone finally speaks." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Evan rubbed his face and grabbed his keys again. "I'm going out. You just got in," I said. "I said I'm going out." He slammed the door and was gone again. For a long moment, none of us moved. The clock ticked loudly in the corner. Marjorie finally muttered, "You've poisoned this house." I turned to her, smiling faintly. "No, Mrs. Carter, I'm just airing it out." Tina glared at me from the couch. "You enjoy this, don't you?" Watching us break, I met her gaze without blinking. "No, I just stopped pretending it wasn't already broken." She rolled her eyes and disappeared into her room, slamming the door. The rest of the morning passed like a fog. Sophie and I sat together on the porch, watching rain clouds drift away. She drew pictures on her little notebook, flowers, suns, stick figures, holding hands. When she looked up, she asked Mommy, "Why do people yell so much?" "Because they're afraid," I said softly. "Of what?" "The truth." She thought about it for a while, then said, "You don't yell." I smiled. "That's because I'm not afraid anymore." That afternoon, Evan came back sober, but quiet, his shoulders heavy. He didn't yell, didn't even look at me. He went straight to the study and shut the door. Marjorie followed him, whispering furiously through the crack, but I could still hear her. "We can't let her keep running this house. She's manipulating you." "I'm handling it," he growled. "No, you're not. You're letting her turn you into a fool." "Enough," he shouted. "I said I'm handling it." The argument ended with the sound of a glass shattering. I didn't move. The more they fought, the less I had to do. After dinner, when the house grew quiet again, I heard Tina crying softly in her room. For a brief second, I almost felt pity. Almost. Then I remembered Lila's words. She laughed when he hit me. The pity disappeared. I checked on Sophie, who was fast asleep, clutching her doll. I brushed her hair back, gently kissed her forehead, and closed the door. When I came downstairs, Marjorie was waiting for me in the hallway. "We need to talk," she said. "Do we?" "Yes," she hissed. "You're not fooling anyone. I don't know what's gotten into you, but this madness stops now." "Madness," I repeated quietly. "That's what they called me too." She frowned. "What, nothing?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You want the madness to stop, Mrs. Carter. Then tell your son to stop hitting. Tell your daughter to stop lying. Tell yourself to stop pretending you didn't make monsters out of them. Her face went pale. You don't talk to me that way in my house. I leaned in until our eyes met. Then maybe you shouldn't have made it a house of hell, she gasped, stepping back, her hand trembling over her chest. You're sick. No, I said calmly. I'm awake. She turned and hurried away, muttering prayers under her breath. I stood there for a long moment, letting the quiet settle again. Around midnight, I went to the study. The door was unlocked. Inside the desk was cluttered with papers, unpaid bills, gambling slips. Among them, I found a stack of legal documents, Evan's failed cases notes from clients threatening to report him. The perfect man was crumbling. I picked up one page, reading aloud softly. Misconduct, falsified evidence. A smile crept across my face. He had been using lies to win, and now lies were swallowing him whole. I slipped a few of the most incriminating papers into my pocket. Footsteps creaked behind me. I turned. Evan stood in the doorway, his face half lit by the hall light. What are you doing in here? He asked, his tone dangerously calm. Cleaning, I said, setting the papers down. He walked closer. You're lying. I raised my eyebrows. Seems we have something in common then. He stopped just in front of me, close enough for me to smell the faint trace of whiskey still clinging to him. You're playing with fire, Lila. Good, I whispered. I've lived in the dark too long. For a moment we just stared at each other. Then he laughed low and bitter. You really think you can scare me? I met his gaze and said quietly, No. I think I already did. He blinked, and for the first time I saw the flicker of fear behind his anger. He turned away, muttering something I couldn't catch, and walked out. When I was alone again, I opened his laptop. The password was Easy Carter, 1978. I scrolled through folders, emails, bank statements, photos. In one of the drafts, I found a letter addressed to a woman named Linda. The words made my stomach turn. She's too weak to leave, and I'm tired of her tears. Maybe when she's gone, I'll finally live again. I copied the email to my flash drive and closed the laptop. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly. I walked to the window and opened it. The rain had returned, gentle this time. I breathed in the cool air, feeling it wash through me. Down the hall, Marjorie's voice called out in her sleep, a half-formed prayer, or a curse, I couldn't tell. Tina mumbled something behind her door. Evan's footsteps echoed once upstairs, then stopped. The house was trembling on the edge of collapse, and I was the quiet wind pushing it over. I sat in the chair by the window, letting the rain tap the sill like a heartbeat. Tomorrow, I thought, would be the beginning of his unraveling. Not through violence, but through exposure. He thought he could make me small. He thought he could bury the truth. But I had spent 10 years learning how to survive darkness. Now I was teaching him what it feels like to live in it. I whispered into the rain, You built your kingdom on pain, Evan. Let's see how well it drowns. By the time the rain stopped and the night faded into a pale gray morning, I knew the next move had to be mine, because monsters like Evan never stop until someone teaches them fear. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the windows, warm and deceptive. It painted everything gold, the kitchen, the floorboards, even the framed photos that hid decades of rot. Sophie sat at the table drawing with her crayons, while I brewed coffee, pretending this was just another peaceful morning. But peace never lasted long in that house. Marjorie entered holding her phone, her face pale. He didn't go to work, she muttered. I didn't look up. Maybe the truth finally called in sick. She glared at me. Don't be smug. You don't understand what's at stake here. His reputation is everything. I set the coffee down slowly. You mean your comfort is everything, she gasped. You insolent. Save it, I said, my voice quiet but sharp enough to cut. You raised him this way. Maybe it's time you faced what you created. Her lips quivered, but she turned and stormed off. The door slammed upstairs. Sophie flinched and I knelt beside her. It's okay, sweetheart. That noise can't hurt you anymore. She nodded, pressing a blue crayon against the paper until it broke. When Evan finally appeared around noon, his tie was missing and his eyes looked hollow. He smelled of cigarettes and cheap cologne Fear's perfume. He didn't speak to me at first. He just poured himself coffee, though his hands shook so badly that most of it spilled onto the counter. "You look tired," I said. He glared. "You've been snooping, haven't you? You went into my study. I cleaned it." He slammed the mug down, coffee splashing across the marble. "Don't play dumb with me, Lila. You're trying to destroy me." I wiped the counter calmly. "You're doing that just fine by yourself." He lunged forward, gripping my wrist. The pressure hurt, but I didn't show it. I looked him straight in the eye. "Go ahead," I whispered. "Hit me. One more bruise for your collection." He froze, his breath ragged. For the first time, he seemed to realize I wasn't afraid. He let go, stepping back as though my calm burned him. "You're insane," he muttered. "Maybe," I said softly. "But you made me." He left without another word. The front door slammed so hard it rattled the windows. I stood there for a moment, the pain throbbing in my wrist, the silence ringing in my ears. Then I smiled. He was unraveling faster than I'd expected. The man who lived on control was losing it thread by thread. By afternoon, I put my next plan into motion. I found his laptop in the study again, this time unlocked. I opened the folder marked clients and printed the files. He thought no one would see the forged contracts, the altered statements, the trail of lies. Then I placed them neatly in an envelope and slipped it into my purse. The next stop was his office. I dropped Sophie off with Mrs. Lane, the elderly woman next door who adored her and didn't ask questions. When I arrived at Carter and Hemsley Law, the receptionist looked up from her desk, surprised. "Mrs. Carter, good afternoon. Mr. Carter isn't in yet." "I know," I said with a polite smile. "I just need to leave him something important." I walked down the hall as if I belonged there. I passed the glass doors, the nameplate with Evan Carter, Esquire, etched proudly in gold. I opened the door, stepped inside, and set the envelope squarely on his desk. On top, I wrote one word in red ink: truth. As I walked out, his junior associate, a young man, barely 30, nodded to me nervously. "He's been acting strange lately," he said quietly. "If you don't mind me saying." "I don't mind," I said, giving him a knowing smile. Sometimes strange is just honesty finally waking up. When I got home, Marjorie was waiting in the living room like a queen fallen from grace. "Where have you been out?" I said simply. "You think you can just walk around and ruin my son's life?" I raised an eyebrow. "Your son did that himself. I'm just making sure everyone sees it." "You witch," she spat, trembling. I tilted my head, careful. "Words have power, Mrs. Carter. You wouldn't want to summon something you can't control." Her eyes widened slightly, and she backed away. Good. Let her fear grow roots. That evening, Evan came home with a fury that filled the house. He threw his keys across the floor, the sound sharp as a gunshot. "You went to my office," I didn't deny it. "You left things there that needed light." He advanced toward me, his face twisted. "You're going to regret this." I took a slow step back. I already regret staying silent for so long. He hesitated, his breath uneven. Then he grabbed a vase and hurled it against the wall. It shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces. Sophie screamed from the stairs. "Stop it!" I shouted, stepping between them. He looked up, saw her trembling form, and froze. For a heartbeat, guilt flickered in his eyes, but it was fleeting, gone as quickly as it came. He turned away and disappeared into the kitchen. I went to Sophie, pulling her close. Her small body shook in my arms. "He didn't mean it," she whispered, trying to protect him even now. I closed my eyes, the words slicing through me. "Yes, baby," I whispered back. He did. That night the storm outside was wild. The wind howled, shaking the windows like a beast locked out. Evan drank in the living room, his shadow flickering against the walls from the dim light of the TV. Marjorie stayed upstairs, probably praying to a god she ignored every other day. I sat at the table reading through one of his files again. It was a custody case. He had destroyed a woman's life with forged testimony just to impress a judge. My hands trembled not from fear but fury. I knew then that this man didn't just ruin lives, he fed on them. When the clock struck 11, I stood up, turned off the lights, and went upstairs. I didn't go to bed. I sat outside his door, waiting, listening. After an hour, I heard the soft thud of his glass falling to the carpet, followed by heavy breathing. He was asleep. I slipped inside quietly. The room smelled of alcohol and arrogance. On the nightstand sat his phone, glowing faintly. I picked it up and scrolled through the messages, photos of women, conversations full of deceit, empty promises. I forwarded them all to my email, then deleted the traces. When I was done, I stood over him, watching him sleep. The same man who'd broken my sister, who'd terrified a child, who'd built his ego on fear. His mouth hung slightly open. I wondered what nightmares haunted him now, or if monsters like him ever dreamed at all. I whispered softly. Soon. The next morning I woke to the sound of yelling. Evan had found his office envelope. He was shouting on the phone, his voice rising and breaking. Who sent this? Who would do this to me? I stayed in the kitchen slicing apples for Sophie's lunch, pretending not to hear. When he finally stormed downstairs, his face was pale. You think this is over? It's just beginning, I said quietly. He lunged forward, stopping inches from me. You've ruined me. I looked at him and said evenly, No, Evan, you ruined yourself the moment you laid hands on her. He didn't respond. His jaw clenched, his eyes glassy. He turned, stormed out the door, and drove away, tires screeching against the pavement. The silence that followed was almost holy. Marjorie appeared on the stairs, her face drawn. What have you done? I looked at her. I gave him a mirror. She stared at me, trembling. He'll destroy you. I smiled faintly. Then he'll have to learn how it feels. Outside, the storm clouds began to break, sunlight cutting through like a blade. The world looked calm again, but calm was just the breath before thunder. Evan Carter thought he still had control. He didn't realize that the real trial had just begun, and this time the judge would be karma itself. That night, after Evan's car disappeared into the storm, I stood by the window and watched the taillights fade, knowing his silence wouldn't last long. Men like him always come back when they think they've lost control. The following day, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Evan hadn't come home all night. The morning light filtered through the curtains in thin, nervous lines, touching the dust that danced in the air like secrets trying to escape. Marjorie sat at the dining table, staring at her untouched tea. Tina scrolled aimlessly through her phone, though her hands shook. I moved through the kitchen quietly, the rhythm of my steps steady, unhurried. The quieter I became, the louder their guilt sounded. Sophie played on the floor with her crayons. She drew 3 stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. I smiled. Who's that sweetheart? She pointed to the figures. Mommy, me, and Auntie Hope. Hope? I asked, my voice soft. She nodded seriously. That's you now. You're not sad anymore. My throat tightened. No, I whispered. I'm not. Before noon, Evan's car pulled into the driveway. The sound of the engine made the air stiffen. He slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I heard his shoes crunch on the gravel before he stepped inside. His shirt was half untucked, his tie hanging loose, his eyes wild. He looked like a man haunted by something he couldn't name. Marjorie stood up quickly. Evan. He brushed past her, his gaze locking on me. You think you've won, don't you? I kept my voice calm. I think I stopped losing. He grabbed the nearest chair and threw it against the wall. Sophie screamed and hid behind me. I didn't move. Stop it, I said firmly. Don't tell me what to do in my house, his voice cracked. You have no idea what you've done. I know exactly what I've done. He froze. For a moment we stood face to face, his fury pressing against my stillness like a storm hitting a wall. Then he turned to Marjorie. You see what she's doing. She's turning everyone against me. Even my own daughter's afraid of me." Marjorie wrung her hands. "Evan, please. Don't you please me," he shouted. "You've always taken her side. She's your wife." He laughed bitterly. "No, she's my punishment." I smiled faintly. Finally, we agree on something. His head snapped toward me, rage burning in his eyes. For a second, I thought he might hit me. But then something in him cracked, not like a man about to attack, but a man realizing he's already lost. He stormed upstairs. We heard drawers slamming, the rustle of clothes, the heavy sound of a suitcase hitting the floor. Marjorie turned to me, her face pale. "What have you done? What you should have done years ago," I said quietly. Within minutes, he came back down, dragging his suitcase behind him. "I'm done with this circus," he spat. "You can all rot here together." "Leaving?" I asked. He glared at me. "You think you can drive me out of my own home?" "No," I said simply. "You already did that to yourself." He hesitated, his knuckles white around the handle. Then, without another word, he walked out the door. The sound of the car engine faded into the distance. The silence he left behind was almost deafening. Tina finally spoke. "Is he really gone for now?" I said. Marjorie sank into a chair, her hands trembling. "You've destroyed this family." I looked at her steadily. "No, Mrs. Carter. I just showed it the mirror." That afternoon, the house was eerily quiet. Sophie napped on the couch, one arm around her doll. I cleaned the kitchen slowly, deliberately, until every surface shone. It was almost peaceful until I saw the text message pop up on Evan's old tablet sitting by the window. It was from Linda. "I told you she'd ruin you. Come tonight. We'll fix it." I felt something cold crawl up my spine. So he wasn't gone. He was planning something. When Marjorie left to visit a friend and Tina locked herself in her room, I slipped out. I drove Evan's old car, the one that still smelled faintly of tobacco and leather, down the narrow road toward the motel outside town. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions, the kind of place that hid sins in plain sight. Room 12. The door was slightly open. I pushed it gently. Inside, Evan sat at the edge of the bed, his face buried in his hands. Across from him stood a woman in her 40s with perfect hair and a cruel smile. "Linda. You're pathetic," she hissed. "You said you'd handle her." "I tried," he muttered. "She's not the same anymore. It's like she's someone else." "She's still your wife," Linda sneered. "Make her disappear." The words made my blood run cold. I stepped inside the door, clicking shut behind me. "So that's your plan?" Both their heads jerked up. Evan's face drained of color. Linda stiffened. How did you?" "I have a talent for finding the truth," I said, locking the door. Evan stood, his voice shaking. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should she," I said, nodding toward Linda. "But you invited her into your mess, didn't you?" Linda crossed her arms, feigning calm. "You're insane. You've destroyed his life." I smiled. "Correction. I uncovered it." Evan rubbed his temples. "This isn't what you think." "Oh, it's exactly what I think." I pulled the envelope from my bag, the same one I'd left on his desk now, with a new edition printed screenshots of his messages to Linda. "You didn't just cheat Evan. You conspired. You lied. You gambled, you forged, you hit. But this plotting against me, this is new even for you." His voice cracked. "You can't prove anything." I stepped closer. "Then maybe the court will decide." He stared at me, panic flickering behind his eyes. "You wouldn't." "Wouldn't I?" For a long second, no one moved. Then Linda's composure broke. "You're both pathetic," she said, grabbing her purse. "I'm done with this." She pushed past me and left, slamming the door. Evan sank back onto the bed, defeated. "You've taken everything from me." I looked down at him, my voice cold. "No, Evan. I took back what was mine." He didn't answer. His shoulders shook, not from grief, but from rage he could no longer wield. I turned and walked out, leaving him in that stale, smoky room. When I got back home, the sun had set. Sophie ran to me, hugging my legs. "Mommy, you're back!" I knelt and kissed her hair. "Always." Marjorie was waiting in the doorway, her eyes red. "Where were you?" cleaning up another mess. She stared at me for a long moment, her voice trembling. He called me. He said you're going to ruin him in court. I met her gaze. I'm not ruining him, I'm freeing us. She covered her face, whispering, You're turning into a monster. I smiled faintly. No, I'm just showing yours what it looks like to starve. That night I stood by the window watching the streetlights flicker. Somewhere out there, Evan was breaking apart piece by piece. I didn't need to lift a finger. The truth was doing it for me. Still, a strange calm filled me, not victory, not vengeance, but something deeper. Closure. The kind my sister never got until I gave it to her. In the reflection of the glass, I saw my own face, no longer haunted, no longer angry. Just alive. Down the hall, Sophie whispered in her sleep hope. I turned off the light and whispered back, always. That night, long after Sophie had fallen asleep, I sat by the window watching lightning fade behind the hills, knowing Evan's silence wouldn't last, because men like him never disappear. They retreat just far enough to strike back. The morning after my visit to the motel, everything felt unnaturally calm. The storm had passed, leaving the streets washed clean and shining under the sunlight. Sophie was still asleep, her little hands clutching her doll as if to guard it from the world. I stood by the window sipping coffee, watching the breeze ripple through the curtains. For the first time, I felt the weight of quiet victory pressing gently against my chest. But peace, I'd learned, never lingers long when you're standing on the ruins of monsters. Marjorie came down the stairs in silence. Her eyes were swollen, her movements heavy, like someone walking through a dream she didn't understand. She didn't say good morning, she just stood there watching me. You think this will end well? She asked finally. It already has, I said. She shook her head. You've humiliated him. A man like Evan doesn't forgive that. Then, it's a good thing I'm not asking for forgiveness. Her voice trembled. You should have left while you could. I met her gaze, calm and unwavering. You should have protected your granddaughter while you could. The words struck her like a slap. She turned away, gripping the edge of the counter to steady herself. For hours, the house remained quiet. Tina emerged, once grabbed her purse, and left without a word. I didn't stop her. She'd always been a spectator, never brave enough to intervene. I almost pitied her for that. By noon, I was packing a small suitcase. Sophie needed to leave this place, so did I. I folded her clothes neatly, the bright colors a small rebellion against the gray years that had tried to swallow us. As I packed, I heard the distant growl of a car engine. Tires screeched against gravel. Evan was back. Sophie looked up from the floor, her smile faltering. Mommy, I took her hand gently. Stay in your room, baby. Keep the door closed no matter what you hear. She nodded, her eyes wide. I kissed her forehead and went downstairs. The front door swung open before I reached it. Evan stepped in, his face shadowed, his hair damp with sweat. He looked thinner, more desperate. But his eyes burned with something fierce, hatred sharpened by humiliation. Where's my daughter? He demanded. Safe, I said evenly. Something you could never make her. He sneered. You think you can take her from me? You think the law's on your side now? I don't think Evan. I know. He laughed, a sound without humor. You've been busy digging through my life, but you forgot something I can dig too. He threw a folder onto the table. Inside were printed photos, me outside the hospital, me with Sophie at the park, me leaving the motel parking lot last night. You followed me, I said quietly. I had someone follow you, he corrected. You're not as clever as you think. Do you know what people will say when they see this? You'll look like a crazy woman stalking me, sneaking out to meet strangers. He smiled coldly. Just like your sister. They said she was unstable too, didn't they? For a moment everything stopped. The sound of his voice, the way he said your sister, cracked something deep inside me. I stepped closer, my tone deadly calm. Don't say her name. He smirked. Why not? She was pathetic. Always crying, always begging. You both think you're heroes, but you're just broken copies of each other. Before I realized it, My hand moved on its own. The slap echoed through the room like thunder. His head snapped to the side, and for the first time he looked genuinely stunned. "You shouldn't have done that," he said softly. "I should have done it years ago." His expression hardened. He lunged forward, grabbing my arms. I fought back, shoving him against the wall. We struggled, the table crashing over glass, shattering beneath our feet. I twisted out of his grip, breathless but unbroken. "Let go of this, Evan," I said. "It's over." He laughed breathlessly. "Over? You think a few papers and some gossip will ruin me? You have no idea who I am." I stared at him, and for the first time he saw it, the absence of fear. "I know exactly who you are. You're the man who used to win by making others small. But I'm not small anymore." He grabbed my wrist, but before he could pull, a small voice came from the stairs. "Daddy, stop!" Sophie stood halfway down, trembling. Evan froze, his grip loosened. "Sweetheart, go back to your room." She shook her head. "You're hurting her." Something flickered in his eyes, a brief, painful awareness. Then it vanished. "Go upstairs," he shouted. I moved in front of her. "No, she's not afraid of you anymore. None of us are." He glared at me, his breathing harsh. "You'll regret this," he muttered, and pushed past me toward the door. He grabbed his car keys and stormed out. The sound of the engine roared to life and faded down the street. Sophie ran into my arms, sobbing. "I'm scared." I held her close, whispering softly, "You're safe now, baby. I promise." That night, after she fell asleep, I sat in the living room surrounded by the mess. We'd made: the broken glass, the overturned furniture, the bruises blooming faintly on my arms. It felt like a battlefield after the last gunfire. Quiet, but never peaceful. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen glowed faintly in the dark. I opened the email folder I'd created, titled Justice. Every photo, every document, every message was there. All it needed was one click to send to his law firm, to the press, to every client he had. My thumb hovered over the send button. Then I hesitated. Would ruining him publicly free us, or just chain us to his shadow forever? In that silence, I heard Sophie's soft breathing from down the hall. It steadied me. I closed the email and whispered to myself, "Not yet." The next morning, the world looked strangely new. Sunlight flooded the kitchen, brighter than it had been in months. I made pancakes, humming quietly. When Sophie came in, rubbing her eyes, I smiled. "Good morning, sunshine." She smiled back, her small voice hopeful. "Is Daddy gone?" "For now," I said. "And when he comes back, we'll be ready." Later, I took Sophie to school for the first time since everything began. She held my hand the whole walk, swinging it lightly, her laughter spilling into the morning air. When she turned at the gate to wave, I felt something warm spread through me, something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. When I returned home, Marjorie was sitting on the porch, her Bible in her lap. She looked up, eyes hollow. "He called," she said. "He's not coming back." I nodded. "Then let him stay gone." She stared at me, her voice breaking. "You've destroyed my son." I looked out at the bright blue sky. "No, Mrs. Carter. He destroyed himself. I just stopped him from destroying anyone else." Her lips trembled. "You'll burn in hell for this." I smiled faintly. "Then maybe I'll see him there." As I walked inside, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. For the first time, I didn't look like a woman pretending to be strong. I looked like someone who'd survived fire and come out steel. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I received a message from an unknown number. I opened it, expecting threats, but it wasn't Evan. It was a short video. Him sitting alone in his car, whispering into the camera, "You think you've won, but you've only started a war." I deleted it without hesitation. Let him have his war. I already had my peace. That night, as rain whispered against the windows and the house settled into uneasy silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that peace had come too easily, because men like Evan never vanish, they wait for the right moment to return. 3 days passed, and Evan didn't return. The silence he left behind was deceptive, like the pause before thunder. I could feel it in my bones, that quiet hum of danger waiting to resurface. Even the walls of the Carter house seemed to sense it. The air was thick, uneasy, expectant. On the fourth morning, I found a letter slid under the front door. No name, no address, just my name written in bold, jagged handwriting, Lila. I unfolded it slowly. The message was short, a single line scrawled in red ink. You took everything from me. Now I'll take it all back. My hand tightened around the paper until it crumpled. For a moment, I just stood there, listening to the faint ticking of the clock. Then I tore the letter in half and dropped it into the trash. Let him threaten. I had lived through worse. But inside, I knew this wasn't over. Marjorie was sitting at the dining table when I entered the kitchen, her expression distant. He called me this morning, she said quietly. I froze. What did he say? He said he wants to see Sophie. I stared at her. After everything he's done, she looked down, wringing her hands. He's still her father. He's a danger, I snapped. Her eyes lifted, sharp and defensive. He's broken, but he's my son. And she's my daughter, I said. And I won't let him break her, too. The air between us was cold and brittle. She stood, her voice trembling. If you keep her from him, he'll take her by force. You can't keep running, Lila. You're just making him angrier. I met her gaze evenly. Good. Let him come angry. He'll find I'm not the same woman he left. By afternoon, I was certain I was being watched. A dark car parked across the street lingered for hours. When I stepped onto the porch, the engine started, and it rolled slowly down the block. My pulse quickened, but I refused to show fear. That evening, as Sophie played on the floor, I locked every door and window. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Outside, thunder grumbled in the distance. Again, another storm crawling closer. When I put Sophie to bed, she clung to me tighter than usual. Mommy, is Daddy coming back? She whispered. I brushed her hair back and forced a smile. No, sweetheart. He doesn't live here anymore. She hesitated, her eyes searching mine. Then why do you look scared? I froze. I'm not scared. She shook her head softly. You are. But it's okay. I'm brave now. You made me brave. My throat tightened. I kissed her forehead. Go to sleep, baby. You're safe. When she finally drifted off, I sat in the dark hallway listening. Every creak, every gust of wind against the shutters felt like a warning. It was close to midnight when I heard the sound. A soft scrape, metal against metal. Then the back door latch moved. I stood slowly, heart pounding, every sense alive. Another click. The back door opened. I moved quietly through the kitchen, my bare feet soundless against the cold tile. The moonlight filtered in, illuminating a shadow standing in the doorway. Evan. He looked worse than I remembered, eyes sunken, jaw tight, soaked from the rain. But what made my stomach twist wasn't the sight of him. It was the calm smile on his face. Hello, Lila, he said softly. I didn't flinch. You shouldn't be here. He took a step forward, closing the door behind him. I just came to see my family. This isn't your family anymore. He tilted his head. Oh, it is. You can't erase me. I stood between him and the hallway that led to Sophie's room. You have 5 seconds to leave. He laughed quietly. 5 seconds. You really think you can threaten me? I reached for the phone on the counter, but he lunged forward, grabbing my wrist. His grip was iron, familiar and sickening. You've made quite a mess, haven't you? He hissed. My firm's ruined. My clients are gone. My name is garbage. Do you know what they call me now? A fraud? A failure. You finally got the right title, I said through gritted teeth. His hand tightened, but I didn't scream. I met his eyes, letting him see the steel behind mine. You think this is power, Evan, breaking what's already stronger than you? He hesitated, his expression faltering for the briefest second. Then he shoved me back. You talk too much. I stumbled, but caught myself against the counter. My hand brushed against the heavy cast-iron skillet resting by the stove. I gripped it without thinking. He smirked. You're not going to hit me. I raised the skillet. Try me. For a moment neither of us moved. Then he laughed a low, broken sound. "You really have gone crazy." "No," I whispered. "I just stopped pretending to be sane around monsters." He stepped forward again. I swung. The skillet missed his head by inches, slamming into the wall with a sharp crack. He flinched, rage twisting across his face. "You'll regret that," he snarled. Before he could move again, a small voice called from the stairs. Mommy Sophie stood there, rubbing her eyes, clutching her doll. Evan froze. His expression changed, something soft, desperate, almost human flickered there. "Sweetheart," he whispered. I stepped in front of her. "Don't you dare." He looked at me, trembling. "She's my daughter." "No," I said coldly. "She's mine." He took another step, and I swung the skillet again, not to hit him this time, but to block him. The sound made Sophie cry out. Evan stopped breathing hard. "Get out," I said, my voice shaking but firm. For a long moment he didn't move. Then slowly his shoulders slumped. "You've turned her against me. You did that yourself." He exhaled, eyes dark. "You'll regret this." He backed toward the door, rain spilling in as he opened it. "You'll regret everything." When he was gone, I turned and knelt beside Sophie, wrapping her in my arms. "It's okay, baby. He's gone." Her tiny voice trembled. "For real this time," I nodded, though I wasn't sure. "For real." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen, the skillet still in my lap, listening to the rain pound against the roof. My reflection stared back at me from the window, tired eyes, trembling hands, but a spine unbroken. Before dawn, I called the police. I told them everything, his break. In the threats, the years of violence. I gave them the evidence I'd collected, the emails, the photos, the recordings. They promised to send a patrol. When I hung up, the first light of morning crept across the horizon. Sophie's laughter floated faintly from her room, soft and pure. I closed my eyes. For the first time, I let myself believe it was really over. But deep down, I knew better. People like Evan didn't stop because the world told them to. They stopped when the world finally took everything they had left. And I was ready to make sure it did. By the time the first light crept through the clouds, I knew hiding wasn't enough anymore. Evan had crossed a line, and the only way to end this was to face him head on. The police arrived the next morning. 2 officers stood in the doorway, polite, but weary, the kind of men who'd seen too many families pretending to be fine. I offered them coffee, my hands steady, my voice calm. They took notes while I spoke about the break-in, about the threats, about how Sophie had woken to see her father standing in the dark. "Do you have any proof he entered?" one of them asked. I nodded toward the back door. "The lock was forced, and there's mud on the floor. He was here." The younger officer crouched down to inspect the marks. "Looks fresh," he said. "We'll file a report and add a patrol car in the area for a few nights." "That's not enough," I said quietly. "He won't stop until someone makes him." The older officer sighed. "Mrs. Carter, we understand how frightening this is, but unless he harms you again, our hands are tied. Restraining orders only work when the person obeys them." "He doesn't obey anything," I murmured. They promised to keep watch, but when the door closed behind them, I knew the truth. Laws protected paper, not women like me. Sophie was sitting on the stairs, clutching her doll. "Are the police going to take Daddy away?" "Not yet," I said softly. "But they will." Her little voice wavered. "You're not scared, are you?" I smiled faintly. "Not anymore." That afternoon, I packed a small bag for her just in case. The sound of the zipper closing was louder than it should have been. Marjorie hovered nearby, pale and silent. "Where will you go?" she asked. "Someplace safe," I said. "Someplace he can't find us." She shook her head. "You can't hide forever." "I don't need forever," I said. "Just enough time to end this." Marjorie stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You don't understand my son. He'll destroy you." I met her gaze. "Then maybe it's time someone destroyed him first." Her mouth opened, but she said nothing. She turned and walked away, her footsteps slow and heavy, like the march of someone carrying guilt. That night, the world felt too quiet again. I sat by the window while Sophie slept upstairs, the glow of the streetlight casting faint lines across the floor. I was tired, not of fighting, but of surviving. There's a difference. Surviving keeps you alive. Fighting reminds you why you should be. At midnight, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I opened it. Check your porch. For a heartbeat, I didn't move. Then I rose, walked to the door, and looked through the small glass pane. A small box sat on the steps, slick with rain. Every instinct told me to leave it there. But curiosity was stronger than fear. I opened the door slowly and bent down. Inside the box lay a single photograph, one I recognized instantly. It was Sophie at the park, laughing, her hair blowing in the wind. My breath caught. On the back, written in that same jagged red ink, "See you soon." I felt my blood turn to ice. I ran to check every lock again, every window, every shadow. Then I went upstairs and stood in Sophie's doorway watching her sleep. Her tiny chest rose and fell peaceful and unaware. I stayed there until sunrise. By morning, something inside me had hardened. Fear no longer had room to grow. I called a friend from the women's shelter, the one who'd helped me find resources years ago. She answered on the second ring. "Lila, are you okay? I need help," I said. Within hours she arrived, a small, sharp-eyed woman named Carla. "You did the right thing calling me," she said as she stepped inside. "We'll find a safe house for you and your daughter. You can leave tonight." I hesitated. "And what about him?" She gave me a knowing look. "If he's stalking you, we'll make sure there's evidence. Once he slips up, the police will have to act." I nodded, but my mind was already elsewhere. I didn't want to just survive. I wanted justice. That afternoon I followed Evan. I'd kept track of his movements from the GPS in his old car, something he'd never realized I'd set up. He was staying at a cheap apartment complex outside town. I parked across the street and watched him through the rain-streaked windshield. He looked smaller now, pacing in his living room, shouting into his phone. When he finally stepped outside, I got out and followed, keeping distance. He drove to his office, the one he'd been suspended from after his firm found out about the falsified documents. He still had keys. I watched him unlock the door and disappear inside. Something about that struck me. He wasn't just hiding, he was planning. I waited 15 minutes, then crossed the street and entered through the back. The office smelled like dust and failure. I heard him muttering in his room, the low, feverish tone of a man unraveling. I built everything he said. "She ruined me. I'll make her pay." He was talking to himself, pacing. His reflection flickered in the glass door. I stayed silent, listening. Then I saw what he was doing. He was burning files. Stacks of papers fed into a small metal bin, flames licking the edges. The smoke curled toward the ceiling. I stepped forward. "You really can't stop destroying things, can you?" He spun around, startled. "What are you doing here, watching the end of your kingdom?" He laughed bitterly. "You think this ends with me? You think anyone will believe your story when you've got my name, my house, my child? You'll look like the liar, the crazy one." I took another step. "Then maybe it's time to let the world see who you really are." He frowned, confusion flickering for a moment. Then he saw the phone in my hand, the red recording light blinking. "You smile for the camera, Evan," I said softly. "You're confessing beautifully." He lunged toward me, but I was faster this time. I grabbed the nearest folder from his desk and flung it at him. Papers scattered across the floor as I darted out the door. He shouted after me, but I didn't stop. Outside, I jumped into my car and sped away, heart hammering. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from relief. I had everything I needed. By the time I reached home, the adrenaline had turned to exhaustion. Carla was waiting with the shelter van. Sophie stood beside her, holding her small backpack. "Are you ready?" Carla asked. I looked at Sophie. She nodded bravely. "I'm ready, Mommy." I smiled. "Then, let's go." We drove out of town just as the first drops of rain began to fall again. I looked back once through the rear window. The Carter house was disappearing behind the trees, its windows dark, its shadows heavy. For years, that house had been my cage. Now it was nothing but an empty shell, one more lie Evan Carter could no longer control. Sophie leaned her head on my shoulder. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere new," I said softly. "Somewhere the monsters can't find us," she smiled sleepily. Like a fairy tale, I brushed her hair and whispered, "No, baby." Like a beginning. Outside, thunder rumbled, but this time it sounded like applause. As the van carried us farther from Phoenix, and the storm faded into the horizon, I realized escape wasn't the same as freedom, because until I faced Evan myself, the past would keep breathing down my neck. The safe house was a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Phoenix, far enough from the city that the nights were quiet and the air smelled of dust and sage. The woman who ran it, a retired social worker named Judith, had kind eyes and the kind of patience that comes only from years of watching broken women rebuild themselves piece by piece. She gave Sophie a teddy bear and told me there was a lock on every door. The first night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the desert sky shift from deep blue to violet. Sophie slept soundly for the first time in weeks, her breathing soft and even. I envied her ability to forget, even if just for a few hours. Judith checked in on me at dawn, carrying a cup of coffee. "You've got the look of someone who's waiting for the next storm," she said gently. "I've lived in storms too long to believe in clear skies," I said. She nodded. "Then maybe it's time you learn how to live in the calm." But calm felt like a luxury I hadn't earned yet. 2 days later, Carla brought news. "He's been arrested," she said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. My heart stuttered. "Evan," she nodded. "The recording you gave the police, it matched his handwriting on several forged documents. They raided his office yesterday. He'll be facing multiple charges: fraud, obstruction, domestic abuse. They have enough to keep him behind bars for years." For a moment I couldn't breathe. I had imagined this moment so many times, the justice, the final blow, but now that it was here, it felt hollow. Sophie was coloring at the table, humming softly. I looked at her small, perfect hands and realized what justice really meant. Not revenge, not triumph, just peace. "Will he be able to get out?" I asked quietly. Carla hesitated. "Maybe not for a long time. But men like him, they find ways. That's why we keep your location private." I nodded. "Good." That night I told Sophie her father was gone for a while. She looked at me with those wide, innocent eyes and asked, "Is he going to get better?" My throat tightened. "I don't know, sweetheart. Some people don't want to get better." She thought for a moment. "Then we can just be happy, right?" I smiled, tears burning behind my eyes. "Yes, baby. We can just be happy." The next few days passed quietly. I started working again, remote bookkeeping for a small firm that didn't ask questions. Judith taught Sophie to bake cookies and water the small garden on the balcony. The air felt lighter, freer. But one afternoon when I came back from a quick trip to the grocery store, I noticed something that stopped me cold. A black sedan parked across the street, windows tinted, no plates. I froze, clutching the bag of groceries to my chest. A man sat behind the wheel, unmoving. I stepped closer to the apartment door, my pulse pounding. Then the car engine roared to life and drove away. When I told Judith, her calm expression didn't falter, but I saw her hands tighten on her mug. "It's probably nothing," she said, though her tone betrayed her worry. "But we'll alert the precinct, just in case." That night I checked on Sophie 3 times before she fell asleep. The teddy bear Judith had given her lay tucked under her arm. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "I'll keep you safe." Hours later, a knock came at the door. 3 soft taps. I grabbed the baseball bat Judith kept near the couch and approached slowly. "Who is it?" I called. "It's Carla," came the reply. I opened the door halfway. She stood there in the dim hallway, her face pale. "They released him," she whispered. The bat slipped from my fingers. "What? They reduced his charges. His lawyer made a deal. He's out on bail. He's under supervision, but he'll come for us," I finished for her. She nodded grimly. "You need to stay somewhere else." The shelter's already alerted the authorities. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. No, if I keep running, he wins. Carla grabbed my arm. This isn't about pride, it's about survival. I know, I said. But I'm done surviving. I'm ending this. She stared at me for a long moment. Then be careful. After she left, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the window. The reflection staring back wasn't the same woman who'd once trembled in fear. She was sharper now, hardened, ready. The next morning I received an email. No subject line, no sender listed. Just one sentence. You can't hide forever. I didn't panic this time. Instead, I wrote back, neither can you. That evening I told Judith I was taking Sophie to stay with Carla for a few days. She offered to come with me, but I insisted I could handle it. I packed our things, kissed Judith goodbye, and drove off into the setting sun. But I didn't go to Carla's. I went back to Phoenix. The streets felt smaller than I remembered. The Carter house stood in the distance, its windows dark, the for sale sign tilted in the yard. I parked across the street and waited. Hours passed. Then a car pulled up. Evan. He stepped out slowly, looking around. He was thinner now, his suit wrinkled, his face drawn. He looked less like a man and more like the shell of one. I got out of the car and walked toward him. He froze when he saw me. You shouldn't be here, he said, his voice low. Neither should you, I replied. For a moment, neither of us moved. The air between us crackled like static. I just came to get some things, he said. I'm leaving town. I crossed my arms. You've said that before. This time I mean it. I studied him, trying to see if there was truth behind his words. Why now? He looked down, his voice rough. Because there's nothing left here. For a brief second, he didn't look like the monster who'd tormented us. He looked like a man who had finally met the consequences of himself. I exhaled slowly. Then go. Leave and don't look back. He nodded, almost relieved. You really think I can? You don't have a choice. He gave a small, humorless laugh. You're stronger than her, you know, than my first wife. She was strong, I said firmly. You just mistook her kindness for weakness. He didn't respond. He turned and opened his car door. Then just as he was about to get in, he looked back. You'll never forgive me, will you? No, I said. But I'm done hating you. Hate means I still care. I don't. He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded once and drove away. I watched the taillights disappear down the dark road. For the first time, I didn't feel fear or rage. I just felt finished. When I returned to the safe house later that night, Sophie was already asleep, curled up on the couch under Judith's blanket. I knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Outside, the desert wind howled, but inside it was quiet, so quiet I could finally hear my own heartbeat. Judith stepped into the room behind me. It's over. Yes, I whispered. One way or another. She placed a hand on my shoulder. Then it's time you start living again. I looked down at my daughter, her face soft in the lamplight, and smiled. I think I already have. That night, as I watched Sophie sleep peacefully for the first time in months, I realized that maybe freedom wasn't found in running or fighting, it began in the quiet decision to start living again. A year passed. The desert summer had softened into early autumn, and the air smelled of dry leaves and sunlight. Our lives had settled into a quiet rhythm: school mornings, shared breakfasts, small laughter echoing through the little house we now called home. The nightmares came less often. When they did, Sophie no longer cried out. She simply reached for my hand in her sleep, and that was enough. I worked from home, my desk by the window overlooking the small garden Judith had helped us plant. Marigolds, rosemary, and lavender filled the space where silence used to live. Every morning, Sophie watered them carefully, her tongue between her teeth, determined not to spill a drop. Sometimes she asked about her father. I never lied. He's far away, I would say, and he can't hurt us anymore. She always nodded, as if she understood more than her age allowed. Then we don't have to be scared, right? Right. I said, even though fear had become less of a shadow and more of an old scar, something I could touch without pain. Judith still visited on weekends, bringing cinnamon bread and her quiet wisdom. "You're glowing," she told me one afternoon as we sat on the porch. "I'm tired," I laughed. "That's not the same." "It is," she said. "You're glowing because you're finally at peace." Maybe she was right. Sometimes peace doesn't arrive like a sunrise. Sometimes it seeps in like evening light, slowly, softly, until one day you realize the dark is gone. The last time I heard from Evan was 6 months ago. A letter from the correctional facility in Tucson. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. He wrote about how prison had stripped him down, how he prayed, how he wanted forgiveness. I read it once, folded it neatly, and burned it in the sink. The fire hissed, curling the paper into ash. Forgiveness wasn't mine to give. It was something he'd have to find alone in the silence of his own making. That night, Sophie and I lay under the stars. She pointed at a bright one and whispered, "That's Mommy's star." I asked her, "Why mine?" "Because it's strong," she said. Even when the sky is dark, her words lodged deep in me. For years, I'd been defined by the things that broke me. Now, for the first time, I saw myself through her eyes, not as someone surviving, but someone shining. One evening in late November, I received a phone call from Carla. "He's being transferred," she said. "Maximum security. No parole hearings for at least 15 years. I exhaled slowly. "Thank you. Are you okay?" she asked. I looked around the house, Sophie's drawings on the fridge, the smell of dinner in the air, the warmth of the setting sun. "Yes," I said. Finally. After we hung up, I stood by the window, watching Sophie dance clumsily to a cartoon song. Her laughter filled the room. I smiled and realized something simple but profound. The opposite of fear isn't courage, it's joy. That night I took out an old notebook, the same one I used to keep hidden under my pillow back at the Carter house, full of half-written letters and lists of things I'd never done. I opened to a blank page and wrote at the top, "New beginnings." I listed small dreams. Teach Sophie to swim. Start painting again. Visit the ocean. Laugh more. Each line felt like a step farther from the life we'd escaped. Later, when Sophie was asleep, I walked outside. The air was cool, the sky clear. The stars shimmered like distant promises. I thought about my sister, the one who had once taken my place, who had once believed silence was survival. "I wish she could see us now," I whispered into the night. "We made it." The wind carried my words into the dark as if the universe itself was listening. In that moment, I realized revenge had never been about punishment. It had been about reclaiming something, the right to exist, without fear, the right to live with dignity. Justice wasn't a gavel striking wood or a prison sentence. It was a little girl sleeping safely in her bed, dreaming of stars. As I turned back toward the house, the porch light flickered on, bathing the doorway in gold. The warmth of it washed over me and I smiled. The war was over. But healing wasn't quiet. It was loud in its own way, full of laughter, stories, and sunlight. It was life continuing despite the ruins. When I tucked Sophie in, she mumbled sleepily, "Mommy, are we happy now?" I kissed her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart, we're finally happy." She sighed and drifted into dreams. I stayed by her side for a long while, watching her chest rise and fall, realizing that every storm, every bruise, every scream had led us here to this fragile, beautiful calm. I wasn't angry anymore, just grateful. Because in the end, I hadn't just taken back our lives. I'd rewritten the story. And if anyone asked what became of the woman who traded fear for fire, I'd tell them this. She learned that sometimes you have to walk through hell to remember what light feels like. And now that light was ours to keep. If you've followed our story until this moment, thank you. Maybe you've lived through storms of your own. Maybe you're still standing in the rain. But remember, this survival isn't the end of your story. Healing is. If this story moved, you leave me a comment, tell me where you're listening from, and share it with someone who might need to hear that freedom is possible. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of strength, justice, and second chances, because sometimes the hardest battles lead to the brightest beginnings.